She thought she'd lost everything to the man she trusted. But a single, forgotten key would unlock a past her father had buried deep in the mountains, and a future she never knew she had. What she discovered there wasn't just about an old house. It was about the true cost of protection and the real meaning of inheritance. If you've ever felt like you've hit rock bottom, only to find a hidden door, then I think this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button, because we're about to go on a journey, and I want you to be here for it. The cold was the first thing I registered as real. Not the emotional cold, the hollowed-out cavern in my chest where a life used to be, but the actual, physical bite of it. It seeped through the thin fabric of my jeans, radiating up from the cracked vinyl of the driver's seat. My fingers were stiff around the steering wheel of my 15-year-old sedan, the only thing of value Marcus hadn't managed to tangle in his web of shared finances and broken promises. The engine had been off for an hour, and the late October air was turning the inside of the car into a refrigerator. Outside, the sodium lights of the 24-hour convenience store parking lot cast a sickly, orange glow on the dashboard, illuminating the dust and the few remaining objects of my former life. A half-empty water bottle, a paperback novel with a creased spine, and a single, wilting gas station rose he'd given me 2 years ago, a relic I couldn't bring myself to throw away. It was a pathetic monument to a spectacular failure. 2 years of my life, gone. 2 years of believing I was building something, brick by careful brick. A home, a future, a partnership. Marcus was a master architect of dreams. He could sketch a life for you in the air with his hands, his voice a low, convincing hum that made you believe every impossible blueprint. He talked about a house in the suburbs, a dog, a garden. He talked about our savings, our investments. It turned out the words our and mine were interchangeable in his vocabulary, and I was the only one who hadn't gotten the memo. When the collapse came, it was brutally efficient. The joint accounts were empty. The apartment lease, which I'd foolishly let him handle, was terminated for non-payment. The furniture we'd picked out together was sold. He called it liquidating shared assets to cover joint debts. I called it theft. The law, however, with its cold, impartial language, seemed to side with his version of events. He was a ghost, and I was left holding the eviction notice. So there I was, at 23 years old, with $112 in my pocket, a quarter tank of gas, and a wardrobe stuffed into 2 garbage bags in the back seat. My friends offered couches and sympathy, but their pity felt like sandpaper on my raw nerves. I couldn't bear the "I told you so" glances or the gentle, worried questions. I needed to be alone with my own ruin. For 3 days, I'd been living in my car, driving aimlessly during the day and finding anonymous, well-lit parking lots to sleep in at night. The numbness was a kind of shield, a thick layer of ice over the raging sea of grief and fury beneath. If I didn't feel it, it couldn't drown me. That was the theory, anyway. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, a lifeline I mostly ignored. It was probably my best friend, Chloe, sending another volley of worried texts. I glanced at the screen. It wasn't Chloe. It was an email notification from a free scanning service at a public library. The subject line was my name, Ilara Vance. I squinted. I hadn't used that service in years. Curiosity, a faint and unfamiliar flicker of emotion, made me pick up the phone. The email was brief. Dear Ms. Vance, attached is a scanned document forwarded to our public service address for you. The original is being held at our front desk. I tapped the attachment. A PDF loaded slowly on the spotty public Wi-Fi I was poaching from the store. It was a letter. The letterhead was heavy, embossed, from a law firm I'd never heard of, Abernathy and Sons, attorneys at law. The address was in a town called Blackwood Creek. The name stirred something dusty and distant in my memory, a place my father had mentioned once, long ago. My father. Another ghost in a life full of them. He'd passed away when I was 16, a sudden heart attack that had left a silence in our small apartment that never really went away. We hadn't been close in those final years. He was a quiet, withdrawn man, a long-haul trucker who seemed more at home on the open road than he ever did in our living room. He carried a sadness that I never understood, and I, in my teenage self-absorption, had resented him for it. I started reading the letter, my heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. It was addressed to me, at my last known permanent address, the apartment Marcus and I had shared. It must have been forwarded. The language was formal, dense with legal jargon. Acting as executor of the estate of your late father, Mr. David Vance. A matter of a previously undisclosed asset. A deed held in trust until your 23rd birthday. The words swam before my eyes. I scrolled down, past the legalese, to the final paragraph. We have in our possession the key and deed to the property located at 417 Ridge Road, Blackwood Creek. As you have now reached the age of majority stipulated in the trust, full ownership is transferred to you. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience. My breath hitched. A property? My father owned property. He'd never had anything. We'd always rented. He was always worried about money, always taking extra shifts. It made no sense. It felt like a mistake, a cruel joke. I scrolled back up, rereading every word. It was real. A lawyer had sent this. There was a file number, a signature. It was real. I sat there for a long time, the phone clutched in my hand, the orange light of the parking lot painting stripes across the official-looking document. A property. A key. It was impossible. It was a lifeline. It was a single, threadbare rope dangling into the pit I had fallen into. I didn't know if it would hold my weight, but it was the only thing to grab onto. The cold in the car no longer felt like a threat. It felt like the sharp, clarifying shock of winter air, waking me from a long, terrible dream. The numbness was receding, replaced by a terrifying, electric surge of something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. The drive to Blackwood Creek was a journey back in time. Not just to a place, but to a part of myself I thought was long buried. I left the sprawling, indifferent suburbs of the city behind, watching the landscape slowly bleed from concrete and asphalt to rolling green hills and dense forests. The highway narrowed, became a two-lane country road that wound its way up into the mountains. My little sedan, so at home in city traffic, felt small and fragile here, a tiny metal bug crawling across a vast, ancient landscape. With every mile, the air grew crisper, cleaner. I rolled down the window, and the scent of pine and damp earth filled the car, a smell so potently nostalgic it made my throat ache. It was the smell of my father's jacket when he'd come home from a long trip, a scent of the world outside our cramped apartment. I'd called Mr. Abernathy's office from a payphone at a gas station, my own phone having long since died. A woman with a kind, crackly voice answered. When I gave her my name, she'd said, "Oh, honey, we've been waiting for your call. Arthur will be so pleased, Arthur. Mr. Abernathy." She made him sound less like a lawyer and more like a neighbor. She gave me directions to his office, but also to the property itself. "It's been a while since anyone's been up there," she'd warned gently. "Don't expect too much," I didn't. Expecting anything felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. All I needed was a roof. Any roof. Blackwood Creek wasn't so much a town as a punctuation mark on the long, winding road. A general store with a rusted tin roof, a post office, a single-pump gas station, and a handful of houses. Mr. Abernathy's office was a small brick building next to the post office, with a neatly lettered sign swinging in the breeze. I decided to go to the house first. I needed to see it, to know it was real, before I faced the man who held the answers. The final turnoff was onto a gravel road marked only by a faded wooden sign that said Ridge Road. The gravel crunched under my tires as the car climbed, the trees pressing in close on either side, their branches forming a canopy overhead. After another mile, the road opened into a clearing, and I saw it. The receptionist's words were an understatement. The farmhouse looked less like it had been empty for a while, and more like it had been actively surrendering to the wilderness. It was a simple, two-story wooden structure, but the white paint was peeling in long, curling strips, revealing weathered gray wood beneath. The porch roof sagged dangerously in the middle, and shutters hung crooked from several windows, like tired eyelids. The yard was a riot of overgrown weeds and wildflowers, knee-high and tangled. A massive oak tree stood sentinel beside the house, its branches heavy with moss, casting a deep, dappled shade over everything. It was dilapidated. It was neglected. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was mine. The thought was so staggering, so revolutionary, it almost buckled my knees. I got out of the car, and the silence was immediate and absolute. No traffic, no sirens, no hum of the city. Just the whisper of the wind through the pines and the distant caw of a crow. I walked up the 3 stone steps to the porch, testing each one before putting my full weight on it. The original key, which the lawyer's office had mailed to the library for me, was heavy and ornate in my hand, made of old, tarnished brass. It felt ancient. I slid it into the lock on the heavy oak door. It resisted, then turned with a loud, grating clunk that echoed in the quiet air. I pushed the door open. The air that rushed out was cool and musty, thick with the smell of dust, time, and forgotten things. A fine layer of gray dust coated every surface, dancing in the shafts of afternoon light that pierced through the grimy windows. The front door opened directly into a large living room. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold and black. Furniture huddled in the center of the room, draped in white sheets that had yellowed with age, looking like a congregation of ghosts. To my right, a staircase led to the second floor. To my left, a doorway led to what I assumed was the kitchen. I walked slowly into the room, my footsteps silent on the thick carpet of dust. I ran a finger along the top of a sheet-covered armchair, leaving a clean streak. Underneath the dust, the floor was solid hardwood. The walls were plaster, cracked in places, but seemingly sound. The bones of the house were good. I spent the next 2 hours exploring, moving from room to room like a detective at a crime scene, or perhaps an archaeologist unearthing a lost city. The kitchen was small, with a deep porcelain sink and ancient-looking appliances. Upstairs, there were 2 bedrooms, both small, both empty except for a simple iron bed frame in each. The windows looked out over the surrounding forest, a sea of green and gold. In every room, I felt a strange sense of recognition. It wasn't a memory, but a feeling of rightness, of belonging. It was as if some part of me had been waiting for this place, even without knowing it existed. I felt my father's presence here, not as a sad ghost, but as a quiet, steadying influence. This house felt like him, simple, sturdy, and private. In the smaller of the 2 bedrooms, the one that looked out over the back of the property towards the mountains, I noticed something odd. The wooden floorboards were old and wide, worn smooth by time. But in the far corner, one board seemed different. The color was a fraction lighter, the grain running in a slightly different direction. It was a detail most people would miss, but my father had been a man who noticed details. He'd once taught me how to spot a patched tire on a semi from 50 yards away. Look for what doesn't belong, he'd said. This board didn't belong. I knelt, my knees cracking in protest, and ran my fingers along the seam. There was a tiny notch cut into one end, just big enough to get a fingernail under. I pulled. The board resisted, then lifted with a soft groan. Beneath it was a dark, square hollow. And inside that hollow, nestled on a bed of what looked like old, dried leaves, was a metal box. It was a simple, dark green ammunition box, the kind you'd find at an army surplus store. It was heavy when I lifted it out, and cold to the touch. It wasn't locked. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My hands were shaking as I unlatched the 2 clasps on the front and lifted the lid. The contents were packed tightly. On top was a thick, sealed manila envelope. My name, Ilera, was written on it in my father's familiar, blocky handwriting. Beneath the envelope, I saw the edges of paper-banded stacks of cash. It wasn't a few $100s. There were dozens of bundles. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. It had to be thousands. Tens of thousands. I lifted the envelope, my fingers trembling. This was it. This was the reason. The answer to the question of why a man who could barely make rent would have a secret, hidden farmhouse. I broke the seal and pulled out a sheaf of folded papers. It was a letter, many pages long, covered in that same, steady script. I sat on the dusty floor, leaned my back against the wall, and began to read. My dearest Ilera, the letter began, and the sight of those words, the intimate salutation from a man who had been so distant, brought a hot sting to my eyes. If you are reading this, it means 2 things. First, that I am gone, and for that, I am sorrier than you will ever know. Second, it means you have found this place, our place, and that means my plan worked. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive an old man for his secrets. I lived my life with a lot of regrets, but you were never one of them. You were the one pure, good thing I ever had. And everything I did, every mile I drove, every secret I kept, was to make sure you stayed that way. I had to stop and take a breath, my vision blurring. I wiped my eyes on the sleeve of my dusty jacket and continued reading. My father's voice, a low and steady rumble in my memory, seemed to speak the words aloud in the silent room. He wrote that before he was a trucker, before he was a father, he had been a different man. He'd fallen in with a bad crowd in his early 20s, a group of men involved in high-stakes smuggling. Not drugs or weapons, he was quick to clarify, but stolen art and antiquities. It was run by a man who was charismatic, brilliant, and utterly ruthless. My father was the driver, the logistical mind. He was good at it. Too good. He made a lot of money, but he also made enemies. I wanted out, he wrote, especially after I met your mother. She was like a sunrise after a long, dark night. She made me want to be a better man. When I told them I was leaving, they didn't take it well. The man in charge, his name was Julian, he told me that no one leaves. He saw it as a betrayal. I knew too much. So I ran. I took what money I had, and your mother and I disappeared. We changed our names, moved across the country. I became David Vance, long-haul trucker. A nobody. It was the perfect cover. He explained that for years, they lived in fear, always looking over their shoulders. After my mother passed away, that fear became a suffocating obsession. He was terrified that Julian, who had a long memory and even longer reach, would find him, and by extension, find me. The money he made from trucking, the money I always thought was barely enough to keep us afloat, was a carefully constructed fiction. He was living as cheaply as possible, saving every penny he could from his old life and his new one. I bought this farmhouse 10 years ago, the letter continued, through a shell corporation, and put it in a trust under your name, Elara Vance. Not the name you grew up with, but your real, legal name. A name no one from my past would ever know. It was my emergency plan, my ark. If they ever found me, I wanted there to be a place for you to go, a place that was clean, that was yours, that they could never touch. The money in this box is what's left. It's not a fortune, but it's enough for a fresh start. Enough to fix the roof, pay the taxes for a few years, and give you breathing room. The property is the real inheritance, Ellie. Land. They can't take land. It's a place to put down roots, a place to be safe. The last page was stained with what looked like a watermark, but I knew it was a tear. I know I wasn't the best father in those last few years. I was so consumed by the fear, by the need to protect you, that I pushed you away. I saw the resentment in your eyes, and it broke my heart every single day. I wanted to tell you everything, but I couldn't take the risk. How could I put that burden on your shoulders? It was my mess to carry. I just pray that you can understand. I wanted to give you a normal life, a life without shadows. I hope I succeeded, at least a little. Be happy here, Elara. Be safe. Be free. All my love, Dad. I finished the letter, and the pages fell into my lap. I didn't make a sound. I just sat there, on the floor of a dusty, forgotten house, as the afternoon sun slanted through the window, and I cried. I cried for the father I never knew, the brave, terrified man who had lived a double life to protect me. I cried for the angry, confused teenager who had resented his silence, never understanding it was a shield. I cried for the years we'd lost, the conversations we'd never had. The weight of his sacrifice, the sheer, crushing scale of his love, settled over me. He hadn't abandoned me. He had been standing guard, my whole life, from a distance I couldn't see. The house was no longer just a structure of wood and nails. It was a monument to that love. The money in the box wasn't just currency. It was years of fear and hope distilled into paper. And I was sitting in the heart of it all, the sole heir to a legacy not of wealth, but of fierce, hidden protection. The grief was immense, a physical weight in my chest. But beneath it, a new feeling was taking root. A sense of purpose. This wasn't just a roof over my head anymore. This was my home. And I had work to do. The next few days passed in a blur of dust and discovery. I took a small portion of the money from the box and drove into town. My first stop was the Blackwood Creek General Store. It was a cavernous, wonderful place that smelled of sawdust, coffee, and old-fashioned licorice. A stoic man with a thick gray beard stood behind the counter, watching me with shrewd but not unkind eyes as I loaded a shopping cart with buckets, sponges, bleach, work gloves, and a dozen other cleaning supplies. New in town? He asked, his voice a low rumble. Something like that, I replied. I'm staying up at the old Vance place on Ridge Road. His eyebrows shot up. The Vance place? Hasn't been anyone up there in a decade. Place must be a wreck. I just nodded. It needs some work. He rang up my supplies, his movements slow and deliberate. Well, he said, handing me my change. Good luck to you. My name's Frank. If you need anything, just ask. My son, Jake, does odd jobs. He's good with roofs. I thanked him and left, feeling like I'd just passed some kind of unspoken test. My next stop was the law office of Abernathy and Sons. The kind, crackly voice from the phone belonged to a woman named Beatrice, who must have been in her 70s. She ushered me into a cozy, book-lined office where a man who looked even older sat behind a massive oak desk. This was Arthur Abernathy. He rose slowly to greet me, his hand warm and dry in mine. Alara Vance, he said, his eyes twinkling. I knew your father, you know. Not well, but I knew him. He was a good man. Quiet. Kept to himself. But you could tell he was solid right to the core. He walked me through the legal paperwork, explaining the trust, the deed, the property taxes, which my father had paid in advance for 20 years. He set this all up a long time ago, Arthur explained. He came to me and said he wanted to create a bolt hole, a safe harbor for his daughter. He wanted a place that was completely off the grid, legally speaking, untouchable by anyone from his old life. He put every safeguard in place you can imagine. As he spoke, he confirmed every detail from my father's letter. He didn't know the specifics of my father's past, only that he was a man who believed himself to be in danger and was willing to do anything to protect his child. Sitting in that warm, safe office, I felt another wave of gratitude for my father's foresight, for his quiet, meticulous planning. I spent the rest of the week engaged in a full-scale assault on the years of neglect. I scrubbed floors until my knuckles were raw. I washed windows, letting bright, clear sunlight flood into rooms that hadn't seen it in years. I beat the dust out of the old sheets, washed them in the deep kitchen sink, and hung them on a clothesline I rigged up between two trees in the backyard. The physical labor was exhausting, but it was also profoundly healing. With every layer of grime I removed from the house, it felt like I was scrubbing away a layer of my own pain and despair. The ghost of Marcus, the sting of his betrayal, began to fade. He couldn't touch me here. This place was built from a love he could never comprehend. One afternoon, as I was wrestling a particularly stubborn, ivy-covered shutter back into place, a sleek, black SUV I'd never seen before crunched up the gravel driveway. It seemed alien in this rustic setting, a piece of the city I'd left behind. A man in a crisp, expensive-looking suit got out. He was handsome in a polished, predatory way that reminded me instantly of Marcus. Ms. Vance, he called out, his voice smooth as silk. My name is Robert Cole. I'm with the Sterling Pines Development Group. He walked towards me, extending a hand, his smile perfectly white and utterly devoid of warmth. I wiped my dusty hand on my jeans before shaking his. Can I help you? I asked, my tone guarded. I hope so, he said, his eyes scanning the property, taking in the peeling paint and sagging porch with a look of faint disdain. We're in the process of acquiring a large parcel of land in this area for a new luxury mountain resort. Your property, as it happens, is right in the center of our planned golf course. He chuckled, as if this were a charming coincidence. We're prepared to make you a very generous offer, one that would allow you to walk away from all this. He gestured vaguely at the house, and start fresh somewhere new. He named a number. It was a staggering amount of money, more than I could imagine. Enough to buy a new car, a nice apartment, to live comfortably for years. It was a number that would solve every problem I had. It was the easy way out, gift-wrapped and handed to me. I thought of Marcus, of the life he'd stolen from me, of the financial hole I was in. This money could erase all of it. I could walk away from this wreck of a house, from the painful memories of my father, and start over, truly fresh. It was tempting. It was so incredibly tempting. I'll need to think about it, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. He smiled again, that same polished, empty smile. Of course, but our offer is time-sensitive. We need to finalize the land acquisition by the end of the month. He handed me a glossy business card. Let me know. He got back in his SUV and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and the scent of expensive cologne hanging in the air. I stood there for a long time, the business card in my hand, the number he'd quoted echoing in my head. A part of me, the pragmatic, wounded part, was screaming at me to take it. Sell the house, take the money, and run. Forget the past, forget the pain. But then I looked at the house. I looked at the clean windows I had washed, the sturdy porch steps I had swept, the front door that my father's key had opened. This wasn't just a property. It wasn't just an asset to be liquidated. It was a promise. It was a sanctuary. It was the last piece of my father I had left. Selling it would feel like selling him. It would be the ultimate betrayal of the man who had sacrificed everything to give me this one safe place. The conflict tore through me, a war between the life I could buy and the legacy I could honor. The developer's offer wasn't just for land. It felt like an offer for my soul, and I didn't know if I was strong enough to say no. Listen, if you've made it this far into my story, thank you. It means a lot to me to have you here, listening. I think we all face moments like this, don't we? A crossroads where one path is easy, paved with gold, and promises to solve all our problems. And the other path is rocky, overgrown, and requires a lot of hard work. But it leads to a place that feels true, a place that feels like home. Have you ever had to make a choice like that? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and I believe our stories are how we help each other navigate those difficult paths. Sharing them makes us all a little less alone. Now let's get back to that farmhouse and the choice I had to make. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on a mattress I dragged into the living room, staring up at the ceiling, the developer's offer playing on a loop in my mind. The number was a siren song, promising security, comfort, a clean slate. It was everything I thought I wanted. I could go back to the city, not as a victim, but as someone with resources. I could get a beautiful apartment, finish my degree without worrying about debt. I could finally have the life Marcus had pretended to offer me. But this time, it would be real, and it would be mine. The sheer logic of it was overwhelming. To turn it down would be financially irresponsible, a decision driven by pure sentimentality. But when I closed my eyes, I didn't see a new apartment or a university lecture hall. I saw my father's blocky handwriting on the pages of his letter. Be safe here. Be free. He hadn't built this sanctuary for me, so I could sell it to the highest bidder for a golf course. He hadn't spent 2 decades living in fear, so I could trade his legacy for a life of convenient consumerism. This place wasn't meant to be a windfall. It was meant to be a foundation. A place to rebuild, not a place to cash in and abandon. The choice wasn't about money versus sentiment. It was about who I wanted to be. Was I the person who took the easy payout, who let the past be bulldozed for a profit? Or was I my father's daughter, someone who understood that the most valuable things in life aren't the things you can buy? The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The internal war was over. I knew what I had to do. I found the glossy business card on the kitchen counter where I'd left it. My hand was steady as I picked up my cheap burner phone and dialed the number. Robert Cole answered on the first ring, his voice smooth and expectant. "Mr. Cole," I said, my voice clear and firm. "This is Alara Vance. I've considered your offer for my property." There was a pause. "And?" he asked, a hint of impatience in his tone. "Thank you for the offer," I said, taking a deep breath. "But the property is not for sale." I could almost hear his perfect smile falter. "Ms. Vance, perhaps you don't understand the scale of the offer." "Oh, I understand it perfectly," I interrupted, a surge of power flowing through me. "But my answer is no. This is my home. It's not for sale. Not now, not ever. Please don't contact me again." Before he could reply, I ended the call. I stood in the quiet kitchen, the phone still in my hand, and a slow smile spread across my face. It was the first real, genuine smile I'd had in months. It felt like a victory. I hadn't just turned down a sum of money. I had chosen myself. I had chosen my father. I had chosen to stay and fight for this place. For the first time since Marcus had walked out of my life, I felt powerful. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the owner of 417 Ridge Road, and I was home. The decision to stay changed everything. It was as if a switch had been flipped, not just in my mind, but in the house itself. The work was no longer about simply making the place habitable. It was about pouring love and life back into its old bones. I used the money my father had left me not as a safety net, but as a tool belt. I drove into the nearest large town and bought lumber, paint, tools, and everything else I would need. I found a book at the library on basic home repair, and it became my Bible. My days fell into a rhythm of hard, physical work. I learned how to patch plaster, how to sand and refinish floors, how to glaze a window. My hands, once soft and accustomed to a keyboard, became calloused and strong. I was sore every single night, but it was a good soreness, the ache of creation, of building something with my own two hands. One day, as I was struggling to haul a roll of tar paper up a ladder to patch a leak on the porch roof, a dusty pickup truck pulled into the driveway. It was Frank from the general store, and his son Jake was in the passenger seat. Jake looked to be about my age, with kind eyes and a quiet smile. "Figured you could use a hand," Frank grunted, gesturing towards the roof. I was too tired and grateful to argue. Jake turned out to be a godsend. He moved with an easy competence, showing me how to properly fix the roof, how to brace the sagging porch, and how to repair the broken steps. He never made me feel foolish for my inexperience, just patiently explained the logic behind each task. We worked together for several days, falling into a comfortable silence punctuated by the sounds of hammers and saws. He refused to take any money, accepting only a hot meal at the end of the day, which we'd eat on the newly repaired porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of orange and purple. A fragile friendship began to grow, a tiny green shoot in the soil of my new life. The deeper I got into the restoration, the more the house revealed its secrets. It was in my father's old study, a small room at the back of the house that I had been saving for last. The walls were lined with empty bookshelves, and I decided to repaint them. As I was scraping away a section of loose paint near the floor, my scraper hit something hard. It wasn't plaster. I scraped away more paint and discovered the faint outline of a small, square wooden panel, seamlessly integrated into the wall. It was another one of my father's hiding places. My heart quickened. I pried it open with the edge of my tool. Inside was another metal box, smaller this time. This one contained no cash. Instead, it was filled with papers, photographs, and journals. I sat on the floor and pulled out the contents. There were old photos of my mother and father, young and smiling, pictures I had never seen before. There were pictures of me as a baby, and there were his journals, pages and pages filled with his handwriting, detailing his thoughts, his fears, his deep and abiding love for my mother and for me. He wrote about his past, filling in the gaps from his letter. But this time, he wasn't just explaining the danger. He was explaining the regret. He wrote about the man he used to be, and the man he had fought so hard to become for us. He also included a set of documents, notarized statements and copies of old records, that proved his involvement in the smuggling ring had been coerced in the final years, and that he had been a secret informant for the authorities against Julian. It was evidence that cleared his name, that proved he wasn't just a criminal on the run, but a man who had tried to make things right. Tucked into the very last journal was one final, short letter. "Alara," it read, "if you found this, you stayed. I knew you would. You have a strength in you that you don't even see, the same strength your mother had. This house was my way of protecting your future. These papers, these are for protecting my past. For you. So you know the whole truth. My name might have shadows on it out in the world, but I don't want them to fall on you. My greatest hope is that you don't need this place to hide, but that you choose it as a place to live. The real inheritance isn't the deed or the money. It's the choice to build a life you love on your own terms. I am so proud of the woman you have become. Love, Dad." This time, the tears that came were not of grief, but of release. The final pieces of the puzzle had clicked into place. He had given me more than a house. He had given me back his good name. He had given me the truth. He had given me his pride. I held the letter to my chest, the papers spread around me on the floor of the room he had built as a testament to his love. The house was no longer just a project. It was my inheritance in every sense of the word. It was the story of my family, and I was the one who would write the next chapter. A year can change a person, or maybe it doesn't change you so much as it strips away everything you're not, revealing the person you were meant to be all along. 1 year after I first turned onto Ridge Road, the farmhouse was transformed. A fresh coat of white paint gleamed in the sun. The shutters were straight and painted a cheerful blue. The porch was solid, and in the summer, I'd put a rocking chair there where I'd drink my morning coffee. The yard was no longer a tangle of weeds, but a sprawling garden where I grew tomatoes, zucchini, and herbs. It wasn't perfect. It was still an old house, with all the creaks and groans that came with age. But it was sturdy. It was warm. It was alive. And it was a home. My life was transformed, too. The city felt like a distant country I had visited long ago. My days were filled with simple, meaningful things. I tended my garden. I worked on the house. I had started a small online business, selling handcrafted furniture I made from reclaimed wood I found on the property, a skill Jake had patiently taught me. It didn't make me rich, but it paid the bills and I loved the work. Jake was more than a friend now. Our shared work on the house had slowly, naturally, blossomed into something more. His quiet strength was the anchor I didn't know I needed. We were taking it slow, building our own foundation, much like the one I'd built for the house. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I would sit on the porch and read my father's journals. I no longer saw him as the distant, sad man from my teenage years. I saw him as a complex, brave, and loving human being who had made difficult choices in an impossible situation. I understood his silence. I understood his sacrifice. The anger I had once felt towards him had been replaced by a deep, profound sense of peace and gratitude. He had given me this life, this second chance. He had known, somehow, that this quiet, simple existence in the mountains was where I would find myself. He hadn't just given me a place to hide. He'd given me a place to grow. The Sterling Pines Development Group had eventually given up, moving their plans to another county after hitting too many snags with the local zoning board, a process Mr. Abernathy had quietly helped me navigate. The threat was gone. My father's final wish had come true. I hadn't needed the house to hide. I had chosen it as a place to live. I learned that inheritance isn't about what you're given, but what you do with it. It's not about the monetary value of an asset, but the personal value you build into it. My inheritance wasn't a house. It was the opportunity to become resilient. It wasn't a box of money. It was the chance to learn my own strength. Marcus had taken everything he could touch, the money, the furniture, the apartment. But he couldn't take my history. He couldn't take my father's love. He couldn't take the foundation that had been waiting for me all along, hidden in the heart of the mountains. He had left me with nothing, and in doing so, he had forced me to find the one thing that was truly mine. This journey taught me that sometimes hitting rock bottom is the only way to find the solid ground you're meant to build on. It taught me that home isn't four walls and a roof. It's a feeling of safety, of belonging, of being exactly where you are supposed to be. And it taught me that the past is never truly gone. It lives inside of us, in the stories we inherit and the choices we make. We can either let it be a weight that holds us down, or we can use it as a foundation to build something new, something stronger, something that is truly our own. I looked out at the mountains, at the setting sun, and I felt a sense of peace that was deeper and more real than anything I had ever known. I was my father's daughter, and I was finally home. So that's my story, or at least the beginning of it. The story of how losing everything led me to find the only thing that mattered. And now, I want to turn it over to you. What does the word home mean to you? Is it a place you grew up, or a place you found? Is it a building, or is it the people you share your life with? Share your story in the comments below. I truly believe that by sharing our experiences, we build a community, a kind of home right here on this channel, for people who understand that the most beautiful lives are often the ones we have to rebuild from the ground up. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in second chances and the power of finding where you belong, please consider subscribing and joining our community. There are so many more stories to tell, and I'm so grateful to have you here to share them with. Thank you for listening.
That's fine. Only human matters. Actually, it's the opposite, Hard Eyes. I would rather support the Pokemon than the peoples. Also, hey Spaghetti, good to see you. Okay, we found a soft seat. Do I like that? Even better to see you. Oh, thanks so much, Spaghetti. Okay, let's grab... We're just gonna go through and grab what we need. Isn't the lore of the game that the humans abandoned the Pokemon? Pretty much, kind of, yeah, D. They had to escape and they left in a rocket to avoid like the environmental disasters that were happening. Ooh, a hanging scroll. I don't think we have one of those like to ourselves. So that's kind of nice. I do want to steal this door though, and the window panes for sure. You know, and maybe I'll just take these stairs. Wait, that's so sad. I know, D. It was really sad. Sure, we'll take these cardboard boxes. Wait, I needed those stairs. I do want to steal those too.